all the different trig identities and their, cofunction, odd and even, reciprocal and quotient, and Pythagorean, we're going to use those in order to figure out or rewrite certain trig expressions into other ones. So for example, let's say that I have 1 over cosine x times 1 minus sine squared of x. And I want to simplify this. When I'm looking at this, I need to figure out a way in order to simplify it. Now, I notice that there's a sine squared. And I hate to tell you this, there isn't an exact process to this. It's just something that you're going to have to manipulate and play around with. You might not get it on the first try. It's something you just have to know. But the sine squared, I see that, and I'm going to try to use that, and it's a 1 minus. Well, based on my trig identities, I know that sine squared of x plus cosine squared of x equals 1. So realistically, cosine squared of x has to equal 1 minus sine squared of x. If that's the case, I'm going to go ahead and plug that in and use substitution. So I've got 1 over cosine x times cosine squared of x. So realistically, I'm going to go ahead and multiply this. I've got cosine squared of x over cosine x. Well, if I were to have, for instance, let's say that I had x squared over x, that would just break down to a regular x. Well, the same concept applies. My answer then is just cosine x. Sometimes you can simplify by factoring. So let's say that I have cosine x tangent x minus sine x cosine squared of x. Okay, so I'm looking at this and I see that I've got a tangent. Everything else is in sine and cosine, so I'm going to go ahead and switch that tangent into sine over cosine. So I've got cosine x times sine of x over cosine x minus sine x times cosine squared of x. Well, the cosine cancel out on the first part because it would be technically sine x times cosine x over cosine x. So those cancel out. So now I've got sine of x minus sine x cosine squared of x. Okay, looking at this, I already told you you're going to use factoring. So looking at both terms, I have a sine of x in both terms. So I'm going to go ahead and factor that out. And I've got 1 minus cosine squared of x. Now, remember back to the first problem in that 1 minus sine squared of x equaled that cosine squared of x. Well, if I reverse that, if I did 1 minus cosine squared of x, this is then going to change to sine squared of x. Well, I can now multiply this and get sine cubed of x, and that's the simplest I can go. Sometimes you'll be given fractions in which you will have to simplify. So if I were to have cosine x over 1 plus sine x plus 1 plus sine of x over cosine x. In order to add or subtract fractions, you're going to have the same denominator. So in order to get the same denominator, I'm going to take the first part and multiply it by the denominator of the second fraction. And I'm going to do the second fraction, I'm going to multiply by the denominator of the first fraction. Okay, and that's so I can get the same fraction in the same denominator, so I can go ahead and combine like terms on the top part. Just so you know ahead of time, this is going to be a long process, and I know it's tricky. Like I said before, this is something where things get manipulated, and you might not always work it out correctly the first time, but sometimes you just got to revise it. And I'm saying this from experience, because this problem alone, I started working it one way, and then I had to rearrange it, okay? So it's just one of those things you're going to have to rework. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply and distribute. So I've got cosine squared of x, and I'm going to distribute the cosine then to the 1 plus sine of x. So I've got cosine x plus sine x cosine x. On the right-hand side, I've got 1 plus 2 sine x plus sine squared of x over that cosine x plus sine x cosine x. All right, so now I can go ahead and add the top numbers in my numerator. So I've got 1 plus 2 sine of x plus sine squared of x plus cosine squared of x all over cosine x plus sine x cosine x. So right now it looks even more complicated than what we started with. But I have a trig identity. So from this, I know that sine squared of x plus cosine squared of x, that right there is going to give me 1. And that's based on one of the Pythagorean identities. So I've got 1 plus 2 sine x plus 1 over cosine x plus sine x cosine x. Okay, I'm going to simplify this as 2 plus 2 sine of x over cosine x plus sine x cosine x. Now, looking at the top, I notice that they both have a 2 in it, and looking at the bottom, they both have a cosine. And they're kind of in the same format when I look at this. So I'm going to factor out the 2 on the top, and I get 1 plus sine of x. I'm going to factor out the cosine on the bottom, and I get 1 plus sine of x. Looking at this, I know that the 1 plus sine x cancels out. So now I'm left with 2 over cosine x. I'm going to split this as 2 over 1 times 1 over cosine x. Well, really, 1 over cosine is secant. So I've got 2 secant of x as my final answer. We're going to be playing around with this more. It's going to take us, a couple days in order to really get a handle of this. It's something that can be complicated, and it's not something that's the same process every time. Like I said, you just got to manipulate it. You may start one way, but then you might change your direction.